Let's solve your problem. When I look at this argument, I see something very valuable to me. I see indicator words. I see the word so. That's a conclusion indicator telling me that the statement that follows it is the conclusion of the argument. It also tells me that the statement that precedes it is one of the premises of the argument. I also see the word since, and that tells me that the statement that follows it is the other premise of this argument. So now that I've got my conclusion and premises identified, I can start to identify terms. And when I look at the terms of this argument, I notice something valuable to me. I notice terms that are very similarly but not identically worded, and I'm going to keep that in mind as I'm creating my terms or identifying my terms. I have people who do not regret their crimes, and I have a person who regrets his or her crimes, and I have people convicted of murder and convicted murderers. So I'm going to use these terms and treat them synonymously as I'm creating the terms I'm going to use to represent the argument symbolically. So I chose the term people who do not regret their crimes, represented by D, convicted murderers, represented by M, people incapable of being reformed, represented by I, people capable of being reformed, represented by C, and people who regret their crimes, represented by R. I've got 5 terms. That's too many. So I've got to reduce down the number of terms. I'm going to do that by looking for term complements. I notice, for example, we have people who regret their crimes and people who do not regret their crimes. I'm going to get rid of one of those, and anytime I want to say people who do not regret their crimes, I'm just going to say non-R. That's a person who doesn't regret their crimes. I also notice here that I've got people capable of being reformed and people incapable of being reformed, and I'm going to eliminate I and go with C. And anytime I want to reference somebody who's not capable of being reformed, I'm going to say non-C. So now I've got my terms, M, C, and R, and you may have different letters for your argument, and that's okay. You just want to make sure that you make yourself a little cross-reference so that you can track whether or not you've represented the argument symbolically the same way as I have, just using different letters. Okay, so now we move on, and we're going to work through the rest of the process of representing this argument symbolically, getting it in standard form, and then testing it for validity. When we represent the statements of this argument with standard form categorical statements using M, C, and R as our terms, we're going to have one of the premises as an I statement, some non-R are M. The other premise is an A statement, all C are R, and the conclusion is some M are non-C. Now, it doesn't matter that we have our premises, your premises are ordered exactly like mine yet. You just want to make sure that you have premises that look like mine, even if the letters are different. You want to have those letters referring to the same category of thing. So now what we have to do is we have to reduce down the number of terms in this argument by eliminating term complements. We've got non-R and R and non-C and C. Ideally, we're going to get rid of the non-R and the non-C by using conversion, obversion, and contraposition. When we look at this first premise, if we convert that statement and then obvert it, we'll get the statement some M are not R. Okay, now we've got to convert it and then obvert it. We've got to do it in that order, because if we obvert first, we're going to wind up with an O statement, and then if we apply conversion to that, we will have committed illicit conversion. So we want to convert and then obvert. For this conclusion statement, we want to eliminate non-C, and we can do that really easily by just obverting it. And when we do that, we get the statement some M are not C. And we can then just carry forward our second premise, all C are R. And now we've got the argument reduced down to three terms that appear exactly the same way 2 times each. The next step is to make sure this argument is in standard form. In other words, we want to make sure that the major term appears as the major premise. The major term of this argument is C, the predicate of the conclusion. And that statement is going to appear as in the first premise. And the minor term of the argument, M, the subject of the conclusion, should be in the second premise. And of course, now it's easy to see that they're color-coded, that our premises are not in the right order. So we've got to switch them. We've got to make it so that all C or R is our first premise, and some M are not R is our second premise. And now we have the argument in standard form. 3 terms, 2 times each, the exact same way each time. Major premise first, minor premise second, middle term appearing in both premises and not the conclusion. And we can ask ourselves, well, what's the form of this argument? We have an A statement, an O statement, and an O statement as our conclusion. So AOO is the mood of this argument, and we can see that our middle term is in the predicate position of both of our premises. That's figure 2. AOO2 is the form of this argument. I can pull up my unconditionally valid inventory, go to figure 2, and looky here, right down at the bottom. So if I've done everything correctly so far, this should be this is an unconditionally valid form of argument. But I'm going to check it by applying the rules for categorical syllogisms. I'm going to identify my distributed terms. I've got the subject of my first premise distributed. The R term, our middle term right here in the second premise, is distributed. And the C term down here in my conclusion is also distributed. Okay, so the middle term R is distributed once, so we can check off rule number 1. We do have a term that's distributed down here in the conclusion, C, so it needs to be distributed in a premise, and looky there, it is. I can't have 2 negative premises, says rule 3, and good news for us, we don't. One of our premises is affirmative. And if I have a negative premise, which we do, I have to have a negative conclusion, which we do. And I don't have 2 universal premises in a particular conclusion, so rule 5 doesn't apply, and this syllogism passes the rules for categorical syllogisms. If I really wanted to go nutso, I could create a Venn diagram as well, and when I mark all C or R, I've got areas 6 and 7 shaded to show that all of the C that exist are right here in area 3 and 4, which is also part of the R container. And then to mark some M are not R, I'm going to put an X right here in area 5, because that's the only place I can have any M's that wouldn't be included up here in the R circle. And then, of course, we see, after doing so, the conclusion statement. Whoops. Some M are not C. Yep, that X right there, that's an M, and it is not a C. Therefore, the argument is valid according to the Venn diagram, according to the 5 rules of categorical syllogisms, and according to the inventory of unconditionally valid forms of argument.